All right. Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. I'm excited today to present the session about various techniques to integrate into development for Office 365 or SharePoint 2013, which are meant to help current developers and designers not so familiar with Office 365 development or SharePoint 2013 to get started and use their current skills into developing nice and modern interfaces in the future. I am just a few words about myself. I am MVP SharePoint server. I live in Geneva, Switzerland, working for a IT professional services company. Most of my work is around architecture solutions for Office 365 or SharePoint 2013. And with this being said, let's kick off the session, and I'll move on to present you the agenda. So what exactly are we talking about today? We will be visualizing a couple of the options that we have today around customizations and SharePoint lists. This is a hot topic. It's one of the most encountered types of developments we are seeing throughout all various versions of SharePoint, and things have changed with the arrival of SharePoint 2013 quite drastically. Basically, the promise has been kept by Microsoft into integrating new and modern developers into the platform so that they can benefit from the skills they already learn while getting quite fast up to speed with development. We will then start and discuss about one particular technique, and which is also a new thing added into SharePoint. It's known as client-side rendering. This technique is practically the tool that allows newcomers to the platform to get started very quickly by using their own familiar tools to develop on SharePoint platform. We will do some demonstrations on this technique to help you speed up your development skills, and then we will go a little bit into a specific case, a more advanced, where we will try to integrate KnockoutJS and Isotope, being a sort of masonry kind of layouts, very familiar today among web developers, and the demonstrations that will be put forward are meant to help you understand how these frameworks can be integrated already into SharePoint 2013. And obviously, we will have a couple of demos aligned. Feel free to ask questions, or feel free to type, as Carrie already mentioned. We will try to get back to you as soon as possible, if not also after the session. So let's see why we needed in SharePoint 2013, or why a new approach was always demanded or expected from the web community with regards to the SharePoint platform. In 2007 and 2010 particularly, SharePoint has been perceived as not so great about building user interface. Those of you who have already worked on the SharePoint, they probably spent quite a lot of time, and they know the pains the platform basically delivers to anyone that tries to go beyond the actual borders that are the recommendations of building custom and complex user interfaces. Therefore, this has been one of the most important drivers. There has also been the need that SharePoint platform gets a little bit up to speed with the latest developments. We've seen modern browsers coming in with support for HTML5, with support for CSS3, and SharePoint was quite outdated, and it was falling behind with regards to other CMS platforms that were providing more and more features and support for building dynamic websites. Also, particularly designers around SharePoint, they know very well that customizing SharePoint's content, such as lists, libraries, or pages, has always been a pain, because in most cases you were brought in to effectively work with XML and XSLT customizations, or you had other options which require loads of development on the server side and increasing effectively the time to deliver any kind of application from the simplest to the most complex. Nevertheless, the last point which I'd like to address is also the fact that SharePoint Designer 2013, in comparison with the 2007 and 2010, has now lost the support for design view. Practically today, the only thing you could, as designer, do with SharePoint is that you understand or you know very well the objects. So if you choose to go for XSLT, again, that's quite a lot of work. If you, however, choose to design and to work directly with objects such as page layouts, SharePoint Designer does not offer you any design support, designer view at this time, so you cannot see the outcome of your results unless you practically test from the beginning till the end to see the rendering. So all these criteria, if you want, plus the fact that more and more web developers have been joining the ranks with learning more and more new techniques into web development, they needed a way to use their familiar tools and to use the skills they've already gained in order to also address the SharePoint customizations. Of course, there are many other types of, we can find many other reasons. However, I would focus on some of the techniques we've been using in the past, some of them still available with SharePoint today, which made our work quite difficult, which required a new approach that will bring us finally to the purpose of our discussion today. So I mentioned already, one of the challenges for designers was to start learning XSLT, and not any kind of XSLT. You're working with SharePoint in terms of designing or customizing the user interfaces require working with XSLT linked to web parts. And that's a specific type, and as SharePoint 2010 came out to the market, basically the XSLT got transformed, and different types of XSLTs came on, which made the developers even difficult to keep up with new additions. So that was and still is one of the, if you say, one of the most complex jobs in customizing user interfaces. The other approach, which has been better perceived, particularly ever since SharePoint 2010, is to build custom JavaScript. To integrate, however, these custom JavaScript, you did not have too many options, and none of these options were easy. What I mean by that is that in order to have consistency or to use any of the common libraries that we are using today when we do web development, such as jQuery libraries or jQuery plugins, very often the designers or developers, they had to find ingenious ways to integrate these libraries so that they can load automatically on particular pages or as part of their web parts or custom components. This made quite some big sacrifices from the administrative part, requirements into changing the actual master page, and so on. So, or using content editor web parts to attach JavaScripts which are stored afterwards in some libraries. This technique is also feasible today. However, as we will see just briefly, this technique has been drastically improved, and it's much more accessible today for any designer in order to benefit from it quickly without having to figure out which web part should I put where and what kind of changes should I perform on my current site. Another technique, which was, however, only destined to actual server-side developers, if you want, was to customize directly the ASP.NET based forms of the library or views themselves, which again led to loads of problems, particularly during migration and upgrade scenarios, not to mention the fact that in most cases require the Visual Studio to have installed on the machine so that you can deploy and validate. In addition to that, every server-side development also requires their own environment locally on the machine, which poses additional problems as it requires quite strong machines to support the local deployment of SharePoint 2010 or SharePoint 2013. Excuse me. So the most easiest, so far none of the options which I mentioned are destined to power users or to business users in either way. They all require advanced web skills, web development skills, or web designer skills, not to mention XML, XSLT. And these put quite a big barrier in the adoption of the platform, particularly when it comes to building customized or business-ready solutions. This is where InfoPath, as part of the Office suite, brought in advantages which enabled effectively business users or power users to quickly start customizing the look and feel of the forms or of the list as they are seeing automatically the results very quickly without having the need to have any SharePoint Designer or Visual Studio or any web designer tool for that matter. That is why InfoPath has gained quite a lot of adoption, and we are seeing today in large environment a huge proliferation of these forms. The main downside of InfoPath is that they make the platform hard manageable, but at the same time they are not web friendly. So public websites cannot benefit from InfoPath forms as they have specific needs, which automatically only makes InfoPath one of the tools that is feasible to be worked particularly in intranet environments. Also, another important aspect of InfoPath or limitation is the fact that in today's world, where most of modern browsers require CSS or HTML5 support, the HTML that is rendered even in the web browser mode is not compatible and is not ready for high quality or very customized websites. So this leaves us with one last box, which I intentionally left at the end. It's called the client-side rendering. Client-side rendering is one of the techniques which has been introduced in SharePoint 2013 and relies on enabling web designers or web developers to use JavaScript custom codes or to inject JavaScript custom codes into the logic of user interface rendering. Client-side rendering, or CSR, as it is known in the SharePoint 2013 or Office 365 development world, it's something that is gaining quite rapidly adoption through developers, as it doesn't require advanced knowledge of SharePoint. So we will be discussing about this topic throughout the next minutes of our session, and I will be showing you the capabilities of this technique and the possibilities for web developers or web designers to employ this technique to build more dynamic or more appealing websites. Any questions so far? Okay. Moving forward. So what exactly is client-side rendering or CSR? As SharePoint moved towards integrating web developers, there was always a need to adapt or to adopt available custom methods that developers have been using a lot. That means dynamic JavaScript libraries, which provide a very nice and rendering and very customizable and controllable. So moving from having to develop more server-side code, which requires specific SharePoint skills, to the client-side part, where people have more skills and they are much more numerous on the market, has been quite a straightforward move. What happens behind the scene is practically the platform allows now web designers or web developers to choose or to modify the default rendering that SharePoint provides, or to replace it with their own. while maintaining the data flow standard as a JSON format, so that also compatibility across a wide range of browsers or solutions is maintained, but at the same time keeping consistency with other types of techniques that even SharePoint itself employs. So to summarize, client-side rendering enables practically web designers to customize SharePoint's lists or SharePoint's libraries in terms of forms or views, these being most important means that SharePoint is exposing content to its users. So practically any SharePoint list is enabling editing the content of a particular list by using forms. There are particularly 3 types of forms: for creation of a new entity, for editing, or for visualizing sample. And then there are a collection of views which are creatable via the browser user interface SharePoint enables, which gives people possibility to limitedly design the look and feel and the content they would like to see on the screen in a grid manner mostly. So in all the situations, via the CSR, we have now the possibility as web developers to inject our own logic and to change what SharePoint does in terms of rendering of content and to replace it with our own. Other advantages which are automatically brought in by the CSR is the fact that we could use today any of our well-known web development technologies such as HTML-based or JavaScript and CSS or combination of all 3 at the same time in order to tightly control the rendering of each of the components or each of the fields that is about to be displayed or sent to the user. A subsequent advantage of using CSR is also the fact that we do have a tighter control on the artifacts that we are exposing today. Practically, we control where we would like to put our libraries, be it inline code or be it external code, and we can address these easier by using something that we call predefined tokens, and be able to reuse these components across developments by choosing an appropriate storage location. So how this differs a little bit in terms of server-side versus client-side. What did we used to do before and what changes in this situation? First and foremost, server-side is not gone. So we do have the exact same capabilities as we had before to develop server-side solutions. In the case of server-side solutions, however, the rendering or the logic of rendering certain controls or components stays with the server. What the browser or the client receives is the pre-generated HTML content, which simply gets displayed on the browser, along with other resources that might be included or linked from within the HTML. Obviously, in most situations, SharePoint's content is stored in something we've come to know as content databases, and this is, in most cases, served directly from this content database. In case of client-side rendering, information flow has changed a little bit because instead of sending the render already HTML to the client, it's practically only the JSON in a format of JSON objects, widely available or widely usable across multiple browsers and platforms. And the actual developer decides to show information or to display such information or to process it in any way he sees it fit with regards to what he plans to develop. This practically opens up so many possibilities, out of which, by example, I would mention the fact that you can have multiple devices practically using the same data feed and adapt your user interface exactly so that it matches the device you are about to display the interface or for which you are about to develop. how exactly do we use such feature, and how do we get to employ it ourselves already? Every single web part in SharePoint 2013 or Office 365 for that matter have been updated to include additional options. Practically, if in 2007 or in 2010 we've been using dedicated web parts such as content editor web part to link to JavaScript or to find a way to load behind the scenes some JavaScript code we've been building, that option is no longer needed, because every single web part that connects to data behind the scenes or to a list or to a library now has a new option called the JSLink, which you can see in the bottom of the screen, appearing in the section miscellaneous. And this section, this text box enables us automatically to specify where you have the actual code located in the SharePoint site. So what will happen is that practically we will work on the JavaScript content as web developers, and we can directly upload the content in a library and reference it using this text box instead of loading a particular web part and only then link it. There are other ways that we can benefit from the client-side rendering techniques, and these are basically by using custom developments or deploying the new SharePoint tabs. And particularly in the cases where we develop SharePoint hosted apps. And this will allow us access to all the artifacts deployed or as part of our solution or deployed manually directly on the site. Very important at that time is that when we are referring currently to the location of the JavaScript routines, we are helped by some standard tokens, which can be linking or can be referring to the current site, collection, or other or additional locations, in order to preserve the dynamism of being able to link or to refer to a particular resource without having to hard code the exact site name or the exact address, which could change across deployments or which could change depending on the situation. Also important to note is the fact that JSLink, it's only available in the latest version of SharePoint, all editions, so SharePoint Foundation, Standard or Enterprise, as well all plans of Office 365. Prior to these versions, the JSLink does not exist. When we design or when we decide to use the JSLink to replace the rendering logic, we have multiple options which we'll immediately go through. These options will also impose certain rules with regards to the type of activity that we are about to do, such as replacing the rendering of a field or replacing a whole view, or simply hiding or showing only some specific calculated fields. We will briefly go through a demonstration, and at that time you realize what is the difference between them. So let's start with one simple example and try to exemplify how client-side rendering works. Assuming that we've already identified the list that we are trying to change in terms of customizations, or for which we are trying to impose a new look and feel. At that moment, as a JavaScript developer, there are certain steps that we need to perform. These steps, as also highlighted in the left side, they require creation of a particular object, which gives us access automatically to something called templates for that particular list or library. These templates are automatically populated by SharePoint with regards to the structure of the list or with regards to the actual fields which are or will be displayed in the form or in the view. So practically these templates enables us to access either a collection of all fields, as it is already exposed on the slide, and decide which of these fields will be replaced with which logic. In the case exposed here, we have selected a out-of-the-box task list, and for the task list we decided to replace the rendering that SharePoint is generally providing, by example for the percentage complete, which is just a number between 0 and 100, and expressing effectively how much of a particular task has been fulfilled already, with our own custom rendering. What is the purpose of that? Practically, the percentage complete that comes out of the box, as I mentioned, is just a simple number, and we decided in this situation, something that we will see immediately, to replace with a progress bar, which is much more appealing visually. So in our situation, to continue with the example in itself, practically we've only decided to replace the person complete. Very important, this is the so-called internal name of the field. So it is not the field display name that is usually shown in forms or in views. Any developer that requires to identify or to locate which of the fields are to be replaced, he needs to go for the internal name and not for the display name. Then we have chosen one of the scopes, practically telling SharePoint that we would like to replace the rendering that you are doing only in the case of a view. So every time I have a new view where this particular column is to be shown or exposed to end users, automatically SharePoint will know that in order to display this field will not use his own rendering, but rather he will load our own rendering logic and the way that it has been designed by ourselves. Finally, after the view, we have a custom functions, which is called render person complete. This function actually contains the logic that we are telling SharePoint to use every time he needs to render this particular field. Finally, and the most important, all these templates must be re-registered with SharePoint so that it replaces, for those particular cases, the templates that usually SharePoint will load in case we don't specify anything. So at this time, I think it's probably the best moment to exemplify and to go through live examples. All demonstrations will be done with using Office 365 tenant, and I will go through the steps of showing you how I've effectively uploaded some documents, basically my JavaScript code, into a standard library in SharePoint Office 365, and then how I link using the JSLink property directly to one of these files, and you will see how easy it is effectively to get started with this technique by yourself. So we can see now we have, this is my particular tenant, Office 365. What I have on this site, which I particularly created for this demonstration, I have a documents library. It's a standard documents library where I have directly uploaded 2 JavaScript files. Let's have a look at the content of these files with regards to what we've just discussed earlier, and explain effectively what is to be seen here. For the ease of working with these files, I've already mapped out the location of the library into Windows Explorer, so I can even use something like Notepad or any of the tools that are your favorite to modify the JavaScript itself. So let's take the first one, Tasks Indicator. So in this case, let me open the two of them. Probably they make even better. They help understanding better. So I have two examples of manipulations of two different columns in the same exact list. We can see in the first example on the left side called task progress. It is effectively the exemplification, or if you want, the implementation of the issue mentioned in the slides. So we start with an empty variable, and we clear out any existing templates. We then tell SharePoint that I would like for the field %complete in these situations, which are practically all 4 situations possible. So we either have a view, a display form, new form, or an edit form. What I'm telling here SharePoint is to use in these cases my own template. So if we scroll down a little bit, what I have in my template is practically getting a reference to the value stored in the current item. So practically, as SharePoint is trying to load, let's say in a view, multiple items, he will loop through each one of these items and call our templates. And with respect to the content, the rendering logic mentioned in the template, he will use our rendering. One important aspect at this time, if during your work with such templates you realize that no changes are occurring despite your efforts, you need to know that SharePoint is, in case of problems or errors in the JavaScript, it automatically reverts back to the default settings. And if you do not see anything with regards to your customizations, then most likely either the address where the file is located is not good, or there is an error in the rendering template. To continue, we just simply calculate at this stage a background color, and we build a simple structure of two divs, one within each other, so that it simulates the effective progress bar. However, for the forms, the structure is a little bit different. So in the first case, this is only for views, whereas for the forms, we have a little bit different. We locate again the context, this being the main object that we need to work with in order to, first of all, register our callback as soon as the form gets loaded. So form context.field name, it's the exact addressing if you want, or this is how we ask SharePoint, please locate this field, which comes from the registration of the template, where we mentioned %complete. And with this field, please locate for me a particular div, which is part. We will see it here. So basically, we replace the rendering with an input identified by imp %complete, so that we get a reference to it, to the value mentioned in that field at any time the rendering process occurs. Obviously, we have also form context field value next to field name. So if one gives you the exact name of the field, so the internal name again, the other one gives you the exact value that you can recover and perform your logic. In the second example on the right side, we are choosing another field this time. The field we are choosing from the exact same list, it's called the due date. So this is the internal field name for the due date. In this situation, with regards to whether the due date has passed today or not, we can say that the task is overdue or it will be very soon due. And with regards to if it's in the current week or in the upcoming week, we load a particular image. The images are not deployed by ourselves because these images exist already. So these are some standard images that exist on the physical location on SharePoint. We do not have the possibility to deploy ourselves the images in the layouts as part of a JavaScript-based solution. These are already pre-deployed by SharePoint as part of the platform itself. So this is also what we know as conditional rendering. Basically, we have some logic that enables us with regards to some conditions to choose another approach in terms of what will be the output of our actions. Finally, obviously, we choose the same process of specifying the field in which condition. So we said view and what is the method, just the method above, and register the templates. So these two examples contain very simple code that allows us to control a little bit of design changes, and you will see the results can be quite drastic even with such small code. So I will now switch to my tenant again. And let's navigate to the home page. You can see here, this is a standard task view where I've imported some of the tasks. In this situation, I've put this web part on the home page so that we see the rendering. By refreshing the page, I can see that the due date, which is normally shown as a standard date, is actually now loading images with regards to the business logic I mentioned. So if you recall, in the code, we had the loading of various images with regards to standard logic that we've put in place. We decided to put in place in such situation. Not very complicated, but it gives you already an idea into how you can change yourself. Let's try to load in the exact same list the other type of customizations. Very important. You can only choose to load a single JavaScript at a time. So in our situation, if I want to have, by example, for the other column, complete another rendering while maintaining the due date, what I have to do is practically combine the two JavaScripts into a single one and enhance this part where I specify which fields for which fields the rendering that SharePoint provides must be replaced with our own. So in both cases, it's only one field at a time. It has been voluntarily chosen so that it's still kept quite easy. But if I want to combine the two into a single JavaScript at a time, I need to inject the same code into a single. So let's change and see how automatically, just by pointing to another JavaScript with the exact same data, the rendering gets different. So I go into, zoom a little bit. I go into Edit Web Part, standard functionality of any web part in SharePoint. And as I mentioned at the starting of my session, in the miscellaneous section, we have some new options which are only available again in SharePoint 2013. And these two options are the JSLink, which we mentioned just briefly. And the other one, very important, if you do not want to allow the rendering to occur through the JSLink, so basically as a measure of control for the web designs or the web developments that are performed, the server render still executes the actual rendering server side. What this means is that at the same time you would most likely also have a server-side implementation of the code, which is using the API from the server-side code, where you would need to probably develop in C# or the VBNet with regards to your preference as a language. So no longer JavaScript when we choose the server-side rendering, even though we can mix and match server-side code that will load and generate at the end. That is practically the method that we have been using since today, until today, with SharePoint 2010 or with SharePoint 2007, where we are mixing the two approaches, but the control comes from the server side. So in our situations, I have linked, if you look carefully, to a library where I store my documents. It's called the site assets. And by using this site token, I've practically specified SharePoint that I would like you to look into the current subsite and try to load the JS file I mentioned from the location site assets and with the JavaScript name mentioned here. Of course, you can build deeper hierarchies, so if you would prefer to keep your JavaScript files in folders so that you have a tight structure and control of the files, you can also do so. What is extremely important is just that you may always maintain a path that is matching the location. So in situations where you would like to share a JavaScript file across multiple subsites in the same site collection, you would probably have to upload the JavaScript file in a library at the top level site, so it's available for all subsites. And then instead of site, you could replace this with site collection. That would automatically allow you to effectively refer to a library. In this case, that would be site assets, by example, which is located at the site collection level. So the same JavaScript can be referred from multiple subsites as long as it's put in the right location. I will update now to point to the progress. The other JavaScript was called task progress, just to be sure. So it's tasks progress.js. And I will click OK, which will also apply the changes. We wait a little bit for the content to refresh. It's asking us to save the changes because it will also load the page. Let's load this again. It seems it didn't took the changes in. Edit web part. Into progress. Apply. So we can apply the changes. You already, without even saving, we can already observe that the percentage column now is effectively showing a progress bar, whereas the due date, which was previously showing the icons, now it's showing the actual dates as SharePoint usually provides. So just by pressing OK, I simply confirm that I would like these changes to be stored in the web part, and I can save the page, and the latest changes will be stored forever in the web part, and only the link to the new JavaScript will be effectively used currently so that it changes the rendering of the percentage complete column. Some connection issues, but nevertheless the changes have been stored, and now we can see that wherever we specified some some dates or some progress for some tasks, we can automatically see those values. So these being said, if there are no questions with regards to this approach, we can continue and see some more. Let's recap a little bit what we did. Practically, in order to generate the progress bar, we took the percentage complete scenario a little further. And again, for the same column, we generated the divs plus the CSS classes and everything else needed in order to show the content or the value with the proper rendering that we would like to control. It is important to mention that there are two types of overrides, as we call them, CSR overrides. In our situation, what we've been using so far is something called the field override, meaning that we have chosen to work with the .fields property of the templates, and we have chosen to customize one or many fields. It's only one in our case, but as I mentioned, we could have used many of them. There is also another approach, which is called an item override. The item overrides, however, are a little bit more complex because item overrides are basically acting on the whole row, meaning that if you imagine a grid where you have loads of tasks, basically the item override will act at the level of a single record, a single task at a time, getting access to all the columns so you can perform even more correlated logic, which could involve not just a single field, but many other fields. When you work with item override, however, you do have some other restrictions and limitations because, first of all, item override will automatically replace anything that SharePoint will generate by default. So if you are expecting to have a table row for each of the record or each of the task, practically you have to take control of the full rendering, and this means you need to implement also a header and a footer for each of the row. If you decide to simply come with it open, it's up to you, but implementing the header and the footer or providing customization for this is mandatory, or otherwise the results will be just simple text, which most likely it's even more reduced in terms of functionality as SharePoint 2013 would offer. In our situation, if we look at the slide, in templates header, we are simply generating with the title of the list a strong paragraph, and then after separating it with a line, we introduce effectively within the unnumbered bullets, we introduce the actual values. So basically each of the tasks, if we are enabling this view, will be generating like a bullet point, which has on top of it the list title. If we go to the second part of the script, we realize there are three important properties that must be also configured in order for the item override to work properly. Remember, if these are not configured properly or not functioning properly, SharePoint automatically discards this customization and it falls back to the default settings. So the first one I think is most obvious. It's practically a link to the rendering logic or the function that will render the output to the screen as we want it to, which could be a JavaScript function that generates HTML or just some simple logic. The second one is the actual identifier of the view. Each of the views in any particular SharePoint list have an ID number, which is a numeric, an integer numeric number. And to give you an example, the default one, which is the all items, it starts with 1. So what our example practically states here is that we are looking to replace the rendering for each of the tasks that will be displayed in the all items view. Important also to realize in this situation is that the logic to select some columns or to filter or to sort content still stays with the definition of the view. So in normal terms, a site owner or the person that changes or creates a new view has the options of choosing which columns are visible or not in the view, how they are sorted, if they are filtered and not, and this logic is not affected by the rendering. Remember that what client-side rendering does is effectively only changing the visual logic but not the data behind the scenes. So the data is automatically sent out by SharePoint, whereas the rendering or the display that user will see on its screen is controlled by yourself. Finally, the last very important property is linked to the template that is, if you want, concerned by this change. So we can address at the same time all lists of a certain type, such as all announcements list or calendars or all task lists, with this single type of change. So practically all the lists where I would load this, so to which I will attach this JSLink, they will take the rendering into account only if this list template type matches. If it doesn't match, then your changes will be discarded or will be effectively not taken into account, and SharePoint will provide the default configuration. So if you try to use list template type, say, let's say announcements, and then you try to attach the JSLink to the tasks or to links, you will not see any results. You will practically see the default SharePoint's rendering. I've submitted also a particular link which explains even further what these options are and give you some example. I strongly suggest you go through them. They will help you into identifying certain behaviors. So we've seen so far the benefits of, or if you want, the ability of SharePoint 2013 or Office 365 to enable us to inject our own logic with regards to changing the appearance or changing the HTML output that SharePoint usually provides us and replace it with our own. The capabilities are going much further than this, and what we've seen already now, these are only, if you want, the introduction into the topic. The capabilities are really quite complex, and it could go into hiding fields or replacing with more complex controls, such as, by example, to highlight progress, you can use a slider from the jQuery UI libraries, to give you an example, or you can totally change the way a particular SharePoint form or all the forms behave by adding also validation at one point in time. So the limits here are only with regards to your business requirements or to your imagination as a developer and skills. What are some of the advantages of using this approach? Practically, first of all, as I already mentioned, is you have, as a developer, much better control of what goes out on the screen, what happens when your user sees the rendering. You also have the possibility at one point in time to hook into different types of events, such as, by example, pre-render, which is happening right before the actual HTML content is about to be generated by SharePoint, so the default one, or on the post-render. In the post-render, basically the out-of-the-box SharePoint's rendering has happened, and you get the possibility to start parsing or to start using DOM methods, or document object model from HTML page, in order to navigate or in order to simply access certain elements that have already been provided by SharePoint but you only want to provide slight customizations. You have the freedom, and that was one of the most important points ever since the beginning, as a developer, to choose whichever tools or whichever capabilities you are most familiar with. In our example, I've been using Notepad, but I could have used Visual Studio or even more advanced tools or any other tools that you are familiar with. One very common technique to access these files is by mapping the location of the particular JavaScript. So simply by changing and then refreshing the target page, you will automatically see the results of your changes. One problem with this is obviously the debugging options, because in such situation you will not be able to hook into the complex logic that you might have put in place. What other benefits are also offered by using the JSLink approach is that because of the flexibility you now have to decide where would you like to store these libraries, this could help up with enforcing some consistency across the board. Also because all the web parts in SharePoint 2013 have this capability of linking using tokens to some particular JavaScript files. So you have more freedom into choosing how would you like to structure or how would you like to deploy your files. And this also might have some implications on the governance planning. Finally, performance issues. Also, we have benefits in terms of performance, but we also have penalties as with any client-side based approach. In most cases, the benefits, particularly when you are not manipulating large data sets, and the recommendation is to avoid manipulating large data sets for client side, you would feel on a very short term lots of improvements in terms of performance, also because your server is offloaded of the logic that is within the client code to the browser, so basically on the user's machine. We now move forward, so we are switching a little bit gears. We start working with and discussing about new modern frameworks, JavaScript frameworks such as Knockout. If you have any questions, this is probably the best time to address them now, or we will simply go through these at the end. So let's start with the second part of today's session. Practically, this part builds up on the initial part, on the previous part of our session. This part is going into more advanced. Okay, is going into a more advanced and discusses how we should integrate modern frameworks or modern libraries in web development within SharePoint or Office 365. For today's session, I have chosen KnockoutJS, which is a particular JavaScript library enabling you to create rich and responsive display and editor user interfaces while maintaining a clean underlying data model. Practically, Knockout is one of those JavaScript libraries that uses a very familiar pattern today in today's world, known as MVVM, or a model view model, or model view and view model, a descendant of the MVC framework itself. The advantages of using such a framework are particularly the clean separation of responsibilities. You will be working differently, and the designers or the developers are more happy because they can focus only on the part they master better. But also there are other very important features, such as dependency tracking through the use of something called observables, which enable automatic loading or changing, adapting of the user interface as the underlying data model changes. Very elegant declarative-based data bindings, enabling to specify the bindings to particular properties in the view model through the standard data selectors in HTML, and not last but very important is the fact that the framework is extensible. There are other frameworks which offer similar capabilities. The debate is open and new frameworks appear every day. I think it depends on each of the developer with which framework either has been used to work or has incorporated for his own development. So before moving forward.
I'm sorry, it's Gary. Are you presenting something right now?
Yes.
Okay, can you try to share it again? We can't see anything.
Yes, I think for a moment the presenter has been lost to me, so it's loading again.
Yeah, that looks good. It's loading.
All right. So just before that, I had one particular slide where I introduced the knockout. So it's not big deal. We will go into details. Just wanted to capture this. So now we are moving into before effectively starting to work with Knockout and understand how it's working. I think it's worth to take briefly the time to understand the underlying model the underlying pattern that Knockout and other frameworks are using. And this is the MVVM pattern. So what MVVM pattern practically does, it encapsulates the user interface and any user interface logic in the view, whereas the view model, part of the MVVM acronym, encapsulates the presentation logic and the state of the application. Finally, the model itself, it's keeping the data and the business logic. So in order to define how this happens, practically the view interacts directly with the view model through the means of what is known as data binding and responds to events such as any change in the actual underlying data or in the model. Simply, the MVVM pattern is practically inheriting from it's very close to the MVC pattern, where there is still a slightly important change. Practically, the MVC pattern did not use data binding. Data binding has been introduced into another pattern similar or derived, if you want, from the MVC called the Model View Presenter, which came into the market at the time Silverlight and WPF standards have appeared on as part of the development tools. So finally, MVVM gets the best of these two patterns, very familiar and very used not only on client side, but particularly also on the server side environments, by bringing the best from both patterns. So also very important, MVVM is primarily focused on the UI layer, leaving practically the business logic either to be implemented on the server or directly in the presentation layer. In our case, this translates into, in case of the Knockout, we do have the JavaScript as a capability to support the implementation of the business logic. So let's go briefly and see how to get started with Knockout. Just a short introduction for those of you who haven't used this before. On the upper part, we have an example of simple HTML. From the example, we can observe that the first paragraph is practically using the data bind selectors in the attributes which are introduced with HTML5 particularly, and it links to something called full name. In the two subsequent paragraphs, we have again the data bind, and what we are specifying is practically that for those input boxes, the property value should be automatically linked to first name, or in the second case to last name, whereas on the first paragraph we were linking full name to the text. So we had a simple paragraph, not having an input box which has the value property available. We are practically filling the content of the paragraph with the value of full name. Very important, full name, however, does not exist as a property in our model. Remember, the model in itself practically it represents the structure of our data. And in our situation, if we look at the function app view model, we see that the full name is a special kind of function that is called the computed function in the Knockout world, which combines some formula by using two other properties from the same model. So this is the way that Knockout enables us to add some business logic in the view model behind the scenes, so that we can use this information then furthermore into the user interface. Also very important to note is that the first name and the last name are what we know as observable properties. So what practically means is that at any time I will make a change in the first name or the last name text boxes, the full name will automatically be changed, because observable is what it's known as dependency tracking. So automatically any changes to these properties will be reflected if it's meant into the user interface. That's one of the powerful features of the Knockout, which enables us to build dynamic interfaces that changes according to the business rules that we put in place without refreshing the page. So let's move forward to something more complex. Before actually going into an example we've built on top of Office 365 in our case, but it's work just the same as with in SharePoint 2013 on premises, we have to understand that in situations where we rely on JavaScript for accessing or for modifying SharePoint's content, we need to choose what is the way that we can interact with SharePoint's content. So in the slide currently on the screen, on the left side we have your application, which could be a mobile device or it could be a web browser simply. As we move forward towards the right side, we need first of all to identify a means to authenticate with SharePoint in order to be able to access data. We do not discuss about this topic today, but I would rather focus on the JS/.NET client object models or the rest. So the remaining boxes 3 and 4, which automatically enables us to access the SharePoint data. We have also a brief table of comparison into which situation you need to use which of the object models. SharePoint is very rich on the client-side object model by providing us with the JS-based or .NET-based for sort of console applications or Windows Forms applications, but also with the REST API in case where you have non-structure or other technologies than Microsoft, such as iOS-based devices, which cannot very well understand .NET or cannot work with the JS object model. In our scenario, we will be relying on JavaScript client-side object model in order to access SharePoint's data. Because we will be developing a SharePoint app, SharePoint hosted app, we do not need to worry about authentication. This being also the reason why I decided not to go for it. Because our application is already hosted in our environment, even though isolated in terms of data access or security, it's still able to access information in its own site collection through JavaScript object model or through REST. So the example which I will be, I think I've lost control again. Okay. So the example that we will be demonstrating today will be based on a simple SharePoint hosted app. This being one of the free supported models in the new development paradigm that came with the Office 365 or with SharePoint 2013, the SharePoint model. And we will be doing a SharePoint app that will be automatically deployed through Visual Studio 2013 onto the Office 365 tenant, and it will also link to the exact same task list that we've seen so far. A brief introduction into the type of information we will be accessing and the way we will be accessing this. Retrieving content from a SharePoint list by using the JavaScript object model is quite straightforward. It's very similar to the same manner of doing things if we are to use server-side APIs. In this situation, we start by loading a particular list that is identified by the task lists. But before being able to do so, we need to connect from the JavaScript onto the server, and we do this by using something that is called standard tokens in order to retrieve the URLs of my current location. SharePoint hosted apps have a particularity that the address under which these are deployed changes every time the application is deployed, and it's a unique URL which allows SharePoint to isolate this application from the other parts of SharePoint. And because of this, our app URL, if you want, the location or the subsite where our application will be hosted, must be dynamic in order for our application to properly locate the task list from the host website. In this situation, in the app web URL or in the host web URL, we receive from or via the query string, we will, as I will briefly demonstrate, we receive this address pushed by SharePoint automatically, because as part of the configuration of our solution, we mentioned that we would like SharePoint to pass these standard tokens to us so we can make benefit of them. So the first two lines are practically recreating the application context in order to be able to get access in the second line to a particular list which is hosted in the parent site. Every time you deploy a SharePoint app, this SharePoint app goes into a subsite with that particular unique URL, but also from within that app, you still have the possibility, if security has been provided, and we will see this behavior immediately. If security rights have been provided to you, you can access the host or the parent site and get information from there or manage information from that location. We will, so on the third line, we get a reference to the actual list. We prepare something that in the SharePoint world is called a camel query. A camel query is a specific type of XML with a specific syntax only to SharePoint, used only in SharePoint. And this allows us to build a sort of interrogation into the SharePoint list in order to specify what kind of content I would like to be receiving from SharePoint, and also some additional parameters, such as in our case, we specified that we only want a maximum 10 rows for the purpose of the demonstration. As we advance through the calls, you realize the second call is effectively we use the definition of the query that we just prepared and we send it to the list asking for the items. However, very important to note is that this call does not execute immediately. Using JavaScript object model, calls are batched, meaning that multiple calls are sent at the same time to SharePoint, and the results are returned asynchronously to the client, which is also what happens in our situation. After the get items call, we do have another load where we specify that we are only interested in 3 properties: ID, title, and %complete. You as a developer have responsibility to know and to make sure that these properties are available in the list you are about to interrogate. Otherwise, either you'll get an error or the code doesn't work. And only as the last call in this method, we perform an asynchronous call, passing reference to 2 other methods that are meant to be called in case of success. So when the call returns, we have the list items loaded function that gets called, enabling us to finally have access to results and start processing those results. And the last method is simply in case of error, or if anything goes wrong, at least we get the actual message popped up on the screen. So with this being said, I will now switch to Visual Studio to show you a little bit of this application. So in this application, we have decided to replace totally the way that a particular task list is visualized. So in our situation, we are no longer seeing the content as a grid, but rather in a much more nicer and friendly way, which could be even further customized as the concept of tiles. So we've combined Knockout in order to define the rendering of each of the tile and to be consistent. And just to add up a little bit of spice to the stuff, so that we make it modern, we also use the concept of masonry through the use of something that is called Isotope, which is an implementation, also another very popular JavaScript library, of the masonry effect, which further on could allow us even to change the sorting, and it's fully responsible, adapting to the screen itself. Let's see now how this has been implemented so that we understand what is behind the scenes. I am now into my project. The projects will be available on CodePlex and on MSDN Code Gallery for you to play with or to develop even further. So I have a simple SharePoint hosted app, as I mentioned at the beginning. We will start first of all by showing you where these settings have been configured so that at one time, so through app manifest XML, I am accessing effectively the information about my application that I need to, that are automatically embedded into the application, instructing SharePoint about the permissions or any of the requests I personally have as application, so that the owner of the SharePoint site can decide whether to deliver those to me or not. I mentioned that we receive the address of the current deployment site or the parent site through the query string, which are delivered to us via standard tokens. This is coming automatically with any SharePoint app that you create in Visual Studio. However, if you remove that from the query string, so if you leave it empty, you will no longer receive those parameters in query string, and in case you need to resume context, that will no longer be possible. In terms of hosting, as I mentioned, is SharePoint hosted. This is the simplest model possible. The application is automatically deployed in SharePoint, no need for anything else. We do have 2 other models. One of them is provider hosted, that requires somewhere else another server. It could be another web application that is basically loaded behind the scenes through an iframe into SharePoint. Or if you go for auto-hosted, is behaving in the same way as the provider hosted. However, the auto-hosted is automatically hosted for you in Azure. So you would need at that moment to have an active Azure license so that when SharePoint deploys this for you, when Visual Studio or when you deploy the package, you would need to have that website somewhere in your own Azure tenant. I've also mentioned that we have given the application certain permissions. So in order for me to get access to read the tasks list from the host, if you remember, I mentioned that this application, it's stored in a particular unique address. If we look at the beginning of the address, you see this part has changed at the beginning before SharePoint.com by adding a unique number. This is where my application is deployed right now. If I choose to deploy this again because of any changes I might do, this number will change every time. Therefore, only at a time when I will be releasing to production, basically each creation of each instance of my application will be stored in its own subsite of the current parent site. So for me, the parent site, it's accessible if I use this link here. That will go up into the MVP Mentor site, this being the site hosting this application. Therefore, in order from within this subsite where the application is hosted, if I need to access the task list from the parent or the host site, as we call it in the SharePoint app terms, I need permissions to do so. So I need to ask from the person that is installing the application to agree with the fact that in order for me to do my job, I need to have certain permissions. So I give these two permissions. Write is not important at this stage. It could have been also read, that's enough, to access the web and the list itself, which are automatically embedded into my application. So if I deploy my application, the first time I'm going to use it, the actual user will be asked whether he agrees or whether he trusts the application to use those permissions. The behavior is exactly the same as with any mobile device when you install an application from the store, be it Windows Phone, Android, or iOS. The concept is that the application receives in the name of the user a specific set of permissions, and there is not the person itself that receives those permissions. This was everything about the types of settings that I did. We go forward a little bit to the code itself. So the application comes automatically with some content. Basically, we have a standard CSS. In here, I just added some specific CSS, which helps me create the tiles themselves, which I can change at any moment, particularly this item is the one. Then in the default ISPX being effectively the page that you've seen with the tiles, I added my two libraries, very important ones that I rely on their functionality in order to visualize the results the way I wanted. These libraries have been simply added into an already predefined module, and they have been simply copied into this folder and inserted reference practically from the default ISPX in the order. App CSS has been already loaded by SharePoint, so I had to do nothing. And finally, the logic of my application is in something called app.js, which is effectively executing my logic to interact with the data or anything else. What you will also realize here is that I have just a simple div. So basically, the structure of the HTML I proposed is as simple as possible. However, you have probably identified the data binding characteristics of the knockout. So what this data binding say is practically for each of the tasks you find in a particular collection called tasks, please generate this rendering for me, which is sorry, the main div plus the three subdivs. And with this item basically replicated across automatically as items are coming into the tasks collection. Also, in order to generate the nice effect of automatically realigning, or the masonry effect as we call it, we combine the calls from Knockout with the Isotope, basically stating which element Isotope should consider as being one particular tile. This is all that we have to do on the front-end side, so basically on the page side. We will now switch to the JavaScript itself, so we can see the plumbing effectively that has been put in place in order to support all this structure. We start briefly with the document ready method, which is automatically called as soon as the page gets loaded. The default page has finished loading. And we have one particular method. We will go through this later a little bit. This is the method that enables us to link Knockout with Isotope. And it's a specific method because of the way each of these two frameworks work. And at the end of the discussion, I will also explain this. We mentioned that we need to recover the host URL so that we can access the task list, and the current app URL, basically my current application. With these two values, we are launching the procedure of loading data from the list and processing it. So before moving forward, let's have a look what's in load data. In load data, I am effectively creating my view model. My view model being effectively the one that stores the information that I'm about to show on the screen. This is my data source. A bit. So task view model is the location where my tasks collection will be stored as an observable array. This also means that as soon as I perform any changes to the tasks, automatically this will be reflected into the collection and into the user interface. What I also have here in the task view model, as soon as a new task comes in, I have a method that enables me, on one hand, to create new tasks. We're using those three fields I've mentioned in my query at the beginning, but also I am performing a little processing on the number for percentage complete, which comes as a digital, so that it shows properly as a percentage. If we go back a little bit, the structure of a task, so this is my actual model, this is the structure of my data. I only have three properties, ID, title, and percent complete, that I am also addressing in my HTML file. So if we switch briefly, I am data binding them here into the tile itself, so that Knockout, as soon as he has the data behind the scenes, he will be able to look through all the tasks and automatically link to these properties as they are populated. Going forward, the load data method calls the get task list, which performs, as already explained in the slides, it performs the whole overload of loading the content from the SharePoint list and passing this forward to the method that gets called as if successful. This method being the one that performs some processing, such as collecting each of the item in the collection practically and extracting the property that has been returned to us using standard JavaScript object model in SharePoint 2013 with the get and then the item plus the case sensitive property representing the internal name of the actual value in the task. Finally, as the information is loaded, I tell Knockout to apply the bindings, meaning that all the information pre-processed and prepared in the view model now is replicated into the user interface, and the logic put into the user interface is only now executed. This is the full extent of the work which has been done with regards to combining Knockout with SharePoint data and just to make it even fancier, also add a spice of Isotope so that the masonry gives a nicer effect. So Knockout provides us the separation, clean separation between what my data really means. So if I change anything in the data, I will not have to take over from all the methods. So I will update my application, but I will only go in specific locations, enabling a cleaner separation of responsibilities between design, business logic, and data model itself. Sorry. One last point before we wrap up. I mentioned that the combination of Knockout and Isotope is not a straightforward combination. Practically, Isotope expects to have a full HTML structure already in place in order to access the CSS classes and identify which elements must be considered as part of the masonry grid. Whereas Knockout generates these elements only at a later time asynchronously after the data is available through the arrays that get populated with information. The combination of two made that the timing when Isotope was expecting data and when Knockout was providing that information had to be aligned in such a way that Isotope gets updated as soon as information changes in the underlying data, so it can react on it and appropriately adjust the user interface. And this is the important part of the JavaScript that performs this functionality, and it's mandatory in order to combine the asynchronous manner that SharePoint provides data at a later time, the hidden data binding routines of Knockout, but at the same time the needs of Isotope for the CSS, for the live CSS to be available. This being said, I think we can wrap up at this time. Practically, I still have some more slides to finalize, to leave you with some conclusions. So, just final considerations. It's not very easy when in the situations when we use client-side rendering to do debugging. We have very good experience with the integrated JavaScript debugger in Visual Studio 2012 and 2013. Also, you can use any of the tools that you are familiar with, such as Internet Explorer 11 developer tools is refurbished from scratch, and it offers quite some good insight into the client-side manipulation. Other tools are probably offered by browsers such as Chrome or Firefox through the Firebug. And then for performance, I suggest using Wiselow coming from Yahoo in order to validate the type of information and I help you identify the bottlenecks with regards to content caching and to performance linked to the client-side rendering. One important aspect not to neglect is that when starting to proliferate JavaScripts with the ease of simply uploading JavaScript into a document library, solutions broke as soon as information gets moved from one location to the other or archived. Therefore, it might be good to first of all establish some common guidelines with regards to locations of files and responsibilities, but also because there are so many styles of implementation or development, each developer has its own programming style. Establishing code guidelines, documentation, and practices for all this might be, it's quite advisable. Finally, I will wrap up with some references around blogs or articles in MSDN or a third party mentioning the client side and giving additional examples. And the final slide, we do have more to go with the client-side rendering, particularly when you need to build a full production-ready solution and you would like to use this approach with a SharePoint app. You have to keep in account that deployment of server-side resources such as JavaScript or CSS are not necessarily easy to deploy because of restrictions in SharePoint hosted app. I share with you a link on one example, an article I did about a year ago, where these problems are addressed in an example of a SharePoint hosted app. Enjoy, and thank you for attending this session. Hope you find it useful. And thank you, Carrie, for organizing this.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.